Hi everyone, delighted on this episode to be talking with author, creator, artist Steven Pennella. You'll know Steven for work in worlds like Faith Fallon, as well as Always Punch Nazis, and the work that goes way, way back. I'm sure we'll get into a lot on this episode. So, Steven, thank you for joining.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure. Absolutely a pleasure here as well. How did you get into the world of comics and creating? Let's maybe start there with a brief origin.
Uh, well, long story short, I was always a comic book fan. I think my very first comic book turned out to be the night Gwen Stacy died in the third grade. So, that kind of sold me on it from day one. And I did go to the Kubert School in the 80s, but I ended up not really doing comic book work. I ended up doing mostly commercial artwork or graphic design work. Really hard field to break into. And, to be honest, in the 80s, I wasn't exactly, you know, top flight. I definitely needed a lot of work. But, I had a foundation and, over time I did some, commercial art stuff here and there. Um, I I think I colored a story for Joe Kubert's Sergeant Rock comic once, like a backup story. They used to give backup stories to students. Had another one that was supposed to be printed, but he ended up leaving the editorial reins of the book just before mine was supposed to come out. So, I wrote, drew it. Mark Pennington was the inker, and like almost 30 odd years later, he got the originals back and said, "Hey, do you want them?" I'm like,
Hmm.
"Yeah, sure, why not? What the hell?" Just for
Yeah.
and anyway, I started working on my own series. I started writing it probably early 2008 or 9, give or take. It was based on an old idea I had in art school, and that's where the Faith Fallon book came from. And I really didn't think anything was going to come of it. I did a couple of pages, I threw a few on Facebook here and there, and I noticed that people liked them. And a couple of professional artists were DMing and saying, "Wow, this is really nice stuff." And
Hmm.
so I thought, maybe I should go for it. And then there was an artist by the name of Harlan Schumer, who was also like a comics historian, and he had worked for Neil Adams way back when. And he kept like, saying, "Wow, this is great. This is amazing." And he happened to live in the next town over. So, I ended up, we ended up meeting him. I showed him the work, and he's like, "You got to show this around." And he's always been a huge advocate of mine, and I really appreciate it. I probably never would have went anywhere with this had he not kind of like nudged me. And then I remember bringing some pages to the New York Comic Con like in 2012 and showing them at the artist alley, and 98% of it was like really positive. So I thought maybe I am onto something. And so I started working on it, but my whole thing was I'm not going to release this thing until I know it's finished, because I didn't
Yeah.
want to be one of those guys that put a book out 8 months later, the second issue comes out 3 years later, you know, people are still waiting. I didn't want that. I figured if it's not finished, I'm not putting it out. So I had it pretty much done. And at the original time, it was a grayscale black and white book. And there was a small publisher called Insane Comics around 2016, I guess. And I was listening to the book, but I really wasn't getting a lot of player feedback on it. And then Insane offered me a contract, and I said, "Okay, I'm going to do it." And they published the 12 issues. It was a 12-issue series, and like I said, originally it was in grayscale. I don't know if I can zoom in. Camera's not great here, but uh,
Yeah, I think if you hold it in front of you, I think it'll show up if you do that.
that's it. There
There it
we
is.
could
Yeah.
take that out a bit. So anyway, this was the basic book, the first issue from Insane Comics, and like I said, the whole thing was done in grayscale,
Mm-hmm.
and it actually had a pretty decent run. It was one of Insane's bigger titles. I was doing some of the convention circuit. I did, I did a couple of podcasts. I had some reviews, mostly were positive. And then after the 12th issue, Insane basically, closed shop, like most small publishers do. And a publisher called Marcosia, continued the black and white versions, but they do them only as PDFs or as trade paperbacks. So it's basically like 3 trade paperbacks, 4 issues each. They don't do single floppies. And since it first got published August 2016, a couple of years ago, I started playing around with coloring the series.
Mhm.
Just digging up old files, old Photoshop files, old TIFF files, whatever I had, and started reworking it. And I finally got the combination I wanted where it worked. And I really wanted them to be individual comics. That was really my thing. So uh, I, you know, I own the characters, I own the rights to everything. And I told Marcosia, look, I'm going to do these as individual comics because you guys don't publish individual comics. And it's just going to be through Kickstarters and it's just going to be limited. And they were fine with it. No big deal. And so I went with it, started the first Kickstarter last year. And, I did the first issue, the second, then I did 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7, 8, and 9. And now I'm doing 10, 11, and 12, which will start tomorrow or July 15, depending when this is aired. And it will conclude on August 16th, 2026, which is the 10th anniversary of the first issue of the Black and White series, making its print debut.
Nice.
So she's been a part of my comic work for basically the past decade. And the basic story is think of it as like a weird biography, as if David Lynch wrote Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter in Hollywood Babylon. So basically, Faith Fallon was a world famous actress from the 50s. Everyone loved her. All the women wanted to be her, all the men wanted her. And she rose like a shooting star, but she flamed out really quickly because she tended to do some really stupid things in her personal life. And a lot of people thought she ended up killing herself, but she ended up suffering a fate that was like worse or maybe better than death itself. And it goes back and forth in time. Like the first issue starts off with her in like the 1940s. She's trying to break in as a Broadway actress. And then in other issues, it goes back in time to her humble beginnings when she was adopted by a family of farmers in Kansas. And, she was Dorothy and she didn't like the simple life and she wanted to get out of Kansas. And I'm sure there's never been anything in the literature about a Dorothy wanting to get out of Kansas ever. And so she ends up pursuing fame and fortune and making it. And she hooks up with these producers and everything goes well until she makes the tragic mistake of, getting involved with the adopted son of the producer's child named Luke, who doesn't know who his dad is, which again, I don't think has ever been done in literature or film or TV or anything. And
Breaking new ground. Breaking new
yeah,
ground.
uh, at one point I remember thinking this was almost like there's some parody in it. There's some double entendres, and I used to tell people it's a parody, but think of it as like a parody. It's not funny, almost like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was a pure parody of Frank Miller, of the Teen Titans, uh,
Mhm.
Ronin, all that stuff, Daredevil, X-Men, whatever. But it's played straight. I mean, before it became the Saturday morning cartoon, it was played straight. It was, and that's kind of like who says a parody has to be funny? It just has to, it's a parody. So there are little subtle hints here and there of different things. And it was a 12 issue series, and I basically wrote it, drew it, and did everything except the initial publishing because that was picked up through Insane. And I guess at the time I kind of wanted, I really didn't know much about the back end of the publishing part. And, I knew I could throw it on Amazon, but who knows if anyone would see it. And I figured let somebody else have the headache. And I think that was actually a good move because even after the initial run, I've kept up with my own artwork and I actually started picking up a few audit and assignments from some independent publishers. I did some inking for another company called Phenom Comics, which was couple of years ago, and I'd love to show that stuff, but I signed an NDA not to show anything until the book is released, although that was like 2022. And
Mm.
we did release some books, but the one I worked on is yet to see the light of day. And there were some pretty big names working in the books. Like one book they released was written by Chuck Dixon. They had Bart Sears was working on another title. I mean, uh, I was inking the artist Chris Allen. He was doing Miles Morales at the time. So I inked there was a section of this character um, that was sort of otherworldly. So he drew that part, and I inked about a dozen pages, give or take. I don't exactly remember what it was, but still, I started doing a few things here and there. And uh, over the past few years, I've been, trying to do more art stuff on the side. My day job's graphic designer, multimedia guy for it's a marketing research and consumer product research company. So I do a lot of heavy graphics work for them. I do weird package designs and whatnot, but it really wasn't what I aspired to. But at this stage of my life, I mean, my kids are getting older. I'm not getting any younger. So I figure it's almost like, well, now I can afford to do it. And I'm not even worried about like, the huge scores or the paydays. And I've seen, the way the industry is, a lot of people are just doing their own thing. And, when I work with this other writer named Robert Zadaro, and he was uh, a writer for the Always Punch Nazis anthology that's coming out on Kickstarter. And, he says, look, I know you like to do covers and one-ups and whatnot, and you're not really into narratives anymore, but I've got an idea for a story. It's only 5 pages. And when he mentioned punching Nazis, I was like, yeah, tell me more. I'm all for it because I saw the other anthologies and, approve of this message.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, I can't really get too much into detail, but it was a 5 page story, which, Robert wrote. I did the art lettering and coloring of it. And it's a historically based story about late 1930s America and the German Bund, and which was basically an American Nazi party and terrorizing, Jewish Americans or Jews in America. So it kind of sounds like a bad joke where, a judge and a rabbi and a gangster get together and they're like, well, we got to do something about this. The judge has some ideas. The rabbi says, well, we can't kill anybody. I won't be a party to that. And the gangster says, well, we could always make their lives miserable. And, as a joke, I kind of begged them, can we please call this the Adventures of the Kosher Nostra? But nobody would go for it. But it's a historically, it was something that did happen. And, I got some background material from the writer. I looked up some stuff and I was like, yeah, this could work. And so we made that out. And that's already put away. It's in the can, ready to go.
Nice.
And I'm currently working on a second story, 3 additional pages, separate from the other story with the different writer, and that sort of came about just sort of like through dumb luck. And I figured, well, okay, I could do one more. I mean, it's an anthology. I guess 8 pages isn't overkill. I mean, I didn't want it to be, yeah, I'd love like 30 pages for just me, but I mean, I'm not John Byrne or Frank Miller, so it's an anthology. Everybody should get their punches in, so to speak.
True enough. True enough.
Yeah, and it's just I like the subject matter. Obviously, I think it's something important and it's worth bringing to light. And even on my end, I look at it as like my you know my kids have seen me draw stuff, but they really don't know a lot of what I do. And a couple of months ago, my daughter was part of an anti-ICE rally through her high school, where they all walked out of the school and walked up to City Hall and all that, which was pretty amazing. So I thought, if she's brave enough to do that, I can draw a comic book story at the very least. So I mean, that's where we it's where we are now. And even as far as Faith, like I showed the black and white version, this was, let's put that,
Yeah, it's
there we go.
beautiful, beautiful colored
The
edition as
colored
well.
version. That was the first issue. And again, I made sure to color everything before I even put it out there. I didn't want to like run one Kickstarter with the first issue and then find out, I don't want to do this anymore, which I figured, let me just finish the whole thing. And I actually
Hmm.
spent about a good, between real life and everything else, it took me about a good 2 years, not 24/7 2 years, but it took about 2 years to really get it working. And I even touched up a lot of the artwork. I rearranged a few panels here and there. And it's like, I remember thinking, like, why on earth would Frazetta touch up a painting? It was beautiful. Why does George Lucas keep insisting on who shot first? But, after doing this, it's like, I get it. Like,
Yeah.
or, well, why did Jeff Lynne ELO decide to rewrite and re-record all of his hits? I mean, I do understand it now. Like, you always see, you miss things, or you think, yeah, I could do better. I don't want to totally reinvent it because there's only so many hours in the day or years above ground, basically. But I thought it would be really cool to get it done. And then I started with the Kickstarters, and it's been working. I luckily each one's been successful, and I haven't lost money, which is always a good thing. I can't retire on it, but I don't think many people can. But again, at the stage of my life, I'm 62 pushing 63. I'm not 26. So it's like, I'm not worried about it. This is like, I mean, I don't bowl. I don't play poker. I'm not part of like some, guys softball beer league or something. This is my outlet. You
Yeah.
know, this
Yeah.
is,
It's a
yeah,
great one.
yeah. I mean, you know, it's a fun thing to do. And, there's been a couple of other things here and there that I'll be doing. Hopefully I'll do more work with that writer, Robert Zadaro. Maybe this other writer might have stuff coming on. I'm hoping the Phenom comic book comes out at some point, but again, it's up to them, however that happens. So uh, I guess my whole thing is like right now, if I do something for somebody, I want to be sure it gets out there. To me, that's the most important thing. Like I, I loved what I did for Phenom, but I hate the fact that it's been sitting there for a couple of years. And again, it's not for me to say why. I don't know what's going on. I just, it was basically, it was a freelance hired job. So I did
Mhm.
it, and that was it. And I've done some covers for other smaller publishers. I, haven't seen anything come out to print yet, but who knows? I did one cover for Antarctic Press for Jungle Comics. I think it was the seventh issue. That was a couple of years ago. He's got another cover I did for his Kendra character, which is sort of like a sword and sorcery, blue haired, semi, elfish Red Sonja, I guess. And I did the cover, but I I don't know if that's going to come out or not. I mean, hopefully it does. I'd love to see it, but we'll see how that goes. But that doesn't stop me from doing things, and I am working on something on my own. Again, no real deadline, but the basic premise is it's about uh it's about an artist who figured out he was worth more dead than alive, and like his artwork. So basically, he's failed through his life. He has his real job, the family, blah blah blah. Ends up dying of a heart attack. All of a sudden, his work hits the roof, like and he gets mad, and he's like, and he always used to tell his family, if this makes money after I'm dead, I'm coming back. It made money. He comes back. But
Mhm.
the twist of it is he finds out later on that his artwork is sold as a front for a money laundering scheme and as cover for a trafficking ring. So at first he's like, "Damn it! I thought people liked my work." Then he realizes, "Oh my God, they're using my work to commit these horrible acts." So then hilarity ensues. So that's sort
Yeah.
of written out, but I've only done a few sketches here and there, but I'd love to tackle that at some point. But right now I'm doing these little spot illustrations here and there, and a lot of independent comic book work. And I would tell anyone that's starting out or even tried it, stopped, whatever. I mean, it doesn't hurt to do it.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, if you don't, you know, if you don't, if you're not living like hand to mouth, I mean, put the time in. You never know. I mean, there's so with it's kind of nice to do something organic, even though I do my work, not AI. I do my work mostly digitally, you know, with Photoshop or iPad or Procreate or whatever. But truthfully, a lot of that was, um, married, 3 kids. The kids were, now the youngest is 13, but 13 years ago, he wasn't 13. And if I had
Yeah.
art supplies, it was like finding the time. At least like with a digital thing, I could stop, not worry about the paint getting dry and having to rematch everything. It was all electronic. And it was, between that space and whatever, and I could just pop open a laptop or a tablet and just work whenever versus like if I wanted to do like a traditional charcoal or painting or whatever, I'd have to like have that whole setup. And with little kids, especially my youngest, he created some masterpieces on the wall. Let's put it that way. you know,
Nice.
Unfortunately, I had to like erase them from humanity's view because it didn't quite fit the decor of our house. But I also am gonna start getting back into some traditional non-comic book work. I'm part of a local artist guild, and I'm starting to do more traditional type of stuff, gallery shows and whatnot. It's all local stuff, but it's just something that I think, it works for me. And it actually
Hmm.
kind of helps me with the comic stuff because it forces me to think differently. And, and in a way, the comic stuff helped me work on the more traditional stuff because I've always felt like trying to like make the most of whatever free time I had, especially again, wife, 3 kids, real job, all that stuff. For a while, I was a sandwich generation because I had elderly parents, younger baby children, you know, right in the middle, only child. So yeah, a lot on the plate. But I managed to, in my day job as a graphics person, everything's due yesterday, but you don't find out what you're doing until tomorrow. So, I've learned to like really compartmentalize, even though I can't say that word, and just like almost like work mechanically, like just get it done, like figure out the process first, then do it. And then it sounds uncreative, but it actually it kind of disciplines you. It forces you to get things done, not to not procrastinate too much. So
Yeah.
that.
I was going to ask about back to Faith Fallon a little
Yeah.
bit. You said that this was something that had been kind of in your mind for a while. What elements of the story do you feel like were kind of the drawback? What kind of kept you going back to that and kept it alive?
I think part of the reason, like, it originally started as um, something slightly different from an old art school assignment at Cubert's, where we had to come up with a half a dozen different characters from 6 different genres. So the original concept was basically the actress, and you know ending up turning into, one of the movie producers was a vampire and she ends up becoming a vampire. And while she's eternally young and beautiful, she can't be videoed or photographed or audioed. So she wants her revenge. So yeah, I'm
Mm.
eternally beautiful, but damn it, I can't do anything about it. I'm sucking people's necks for just to stay alive. And I guess, again, when I was younger, I was trying to do the whole DC Marvel Dark Horse train. That never happened. And at some point, you got to start making a living, and I got more into the graphic design aspect of it. Of course, I started in the '80s, and I kind of felt like the guy that inherited his dad's horseshoe factory the day after the first Model T drove off, because all of a sudden the computers were coming out, the Macs and whatever, and it was like I couldn't afford a $10,000 Macintosh at the time, whatever it was. It
Mhm.
was just ridiculous, but like I was like, damn, I'm in my 20s and I'm already like, I'm already ancient. Like everything I learned doesn't even count anymore. Nobody's doing traditional basic mechanical work. Nobody's doing traditional design work. Everything's computerized. But eventually I caught up and, desktop publishing at first. I did some web work in the, a little, but to be honest, it seemed like every week there was a new technology. I just got tired of trying to keep up for the same money, basically. And the whole Faith Fallon story was always sort of in the background. I once wrote it as a screenplay, which was pretty awful, but it allowed me to get rid of all the bad stuff. And I always had like sketches, and I always had like layouts that I just kept. And yeah, as much as I said learn not to procrastinate, real life was in the way, and I started getting a little more serious about it in the 2008 or 9 originally. It was after I had gotten married and had a finally a decent graphics job that was actually paying really well. Like everything started working fine, and even with the first kid, I just started working on it more. And I did have a pretty good framework done, but I think what really kind of finally made me bear down was, I know it sounds like kind of weird, but my I always told my parents back in the day, like, I am going to get this done someday. It's going to happen, and I can't wait for you guys to see it. Well, unfortunately, neither one of them did because they both passed away. One on 2011, my mother 2013, and after my father passed in 2011, then I really started bearing down on the thing and
Yeah.
started working on it. And it was also a way to kind of like, it was a way to like, de-stress myself because, fortunately, there's a lot of stuff you have to deal with. When somebody passes on and you've got an elderly parent that's, needs a lot of medical care. So, it was kind of weird, but I just needed that release. And then I kind of like regained the love of doing this stuff. So, it's not so much like where you start. It's, it's a marathon, not a sprint, not where you start, where you finish. And, it's like I remember seeing those inspirational posters of, Colonel Sanders was a failure until he was 65. Lincoln lost every election until he finally became president. On and on and on. So it's like maybe in my 20s, I thought, oh my God, somebody finally hitting it in the 40s and 50s. That's ridiculous. Now it's like, yeah, I can see where that makes sense. You know,
Yeah.
you think you know everything at a young age, and yeah, there's always a one or two kid people like Frank Miller's that become superstars at 17 or 18 or whatever. But there's also like 50,000 other people that never got that far. It's sort of like I'm sure there's a million people better than Neil Adams ever was that just never had, the right break or the right opportunity or even the right belief in themselves. It just never happened. And not to say that it was a good thing or a bad thing, other things happen. So yeah, faith was just sort of something where I just thought it would really work. And I finally got the story to work right. And maybe there were some influences on, like I said, there's some parody of different cultural things. But there was also some inspirations of like weird storytelling layouts, something you would see more in a European style graphic novel, or you know, weird storytelling, something like a David Lynch type of thing.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
earlier, imagine if David Lynch wrote Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter and you know and tied in Hollywood Babylon. That's sort of where it goes with this. And yeah, I just it definitely got noticed. It definitely got people interested in me doing other work. So, in that sense, it was a great thing. And the fact that Marcosia does the black and white versions, they're based in the United Kingdom, and they've done the distribution of the trade paperbacks since you know since about 2020. And of course, the first one came out during the pandemic, which wasn't exactly great timing, but who knew? But at
Right.
the same time, I they have it, they do their thing. I get my residuals on it, and I get to tell people I'm an internationally published graphic novelist. Oh,
Hmm. That's
and
right. I
at
doff my cap.
right, and at first it actually was doing. I mean, yeah, over time things slowed down. Like I used to, I have friends that did Marvel DC, and then sometimes they would post their residual checks, which are like not even worth a cup of coffee. And I used to laugh at that, like, oh my God, that's impossible. Yeah, no, it's not impossible. I mean, I won't, my check came through PayPal or direct deposit, so I don't even have a check to share. But you know, things run their course, so I figured, well, let's try again with the colored version and see how it goes.
Hmm.
There's always a way to repackage something, and I guess that's why it's you know, it definitely kept my interest for 10 years, and I can't say that a lot of things do. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's something that I and I've had a lot of other artist friends that have always encouraged me to keep doing it. They like what I've done. If I do something wrong, they'll let me know. And it's nice because there's like different people that are sort of like my you know, like De Niro in Meet the Fockers, the circle of trust.
Right.
I'm not going to name names, but I have, I'll share stuff. What do you think? Is this right? Is this wrong? And sometimes I'll hear back right away. Sometimes not so much, but I do get feedback, and I think that's important too. Because I mean, like right now, since the pandemic, I've been working remotely. Most artists tend to work on their own, so you kind of need some human interaction. And me personally, in this area, I don't really know. I mean, the artist guild I'm with, they're mostly fine and modern artists, so they really don't get the comics. But
Hmm.
still, I mean, I don't really know many comic professionals around here that much. I mean, I had lived in South Carolina for a couple of years, from 21 to 2021 to about 2024, but had to move back because of day job considerations. And but there's a huge comic book nerd culture down there. Like you wouldn't think it. I met a lot of artists down there, and a couple of small publishers that I did some inking for, and or some artwork for, and it was like I still keep in touch with them too. So you know, it's for something that's supposedly an isolated lifestyle. It's actually kind of like made me, I've managed to make a lot of good acquaintances and some nice friendships over it. So,
Cool, cool. Um, you mentioned that you write, you do the coloring, you do inking, you do the artwork. Is there a place in comics that you're most at home or something that you enjoy the most, or does that kind of change based on the time or the project?
I think it depends on the project. Like, I mean, the one thing I don't like penciling a hell of a lot. I mean, sometimes it's one nice thing about digital stuff. I can get away with like really loose pencils for myself and just kind of keep like working them over little by little, and then get to an ink stage and then to a color stage. But and then like it just makes it's a little more relaxing. I know for a while there I was trying to get a lot of work just as an inker for
Mhm.
comics, and definitely had some interest, but really nowadays you see a lot of pencilers are doing their own inking, and a lot of that's based on page rates or the lack thereof, and they'd rather not share the difference. Um, so I I know at one point I was thinking, if I could just get some inking work on the side, that would be great. And that was when I sang about Phenom Comics, because it was, the pencils were Chris Allen's a professional penciler. When I inked his work, I it was like it was a pleasure to do it. It was super really detailed, but everything was laid out there properly, perfectly. And there's been other pencilers for not so much, but I would just like show samples. I would try to find pencil artwork online and just do my interpretation. And I also participated in a couple of the Joe Sinnott inking challenges. One
Mm.
Spider-Man with Alex Saviak or Saviak, and Al Milgram's Hulk. So I did those two. I haven't done anything since with them, but they're it's not something I feel like I got to jump into crazy. But at the time, it was fun to do it. I sometimes found different artists like Ed Bennis, or even sometimes I'd see like you know Neil Adams or Ron Friends or whoever posting pencils, and I would just screenshot or download or whatever, and then I would just you know ink them on a tablet, or even sometimes just print them out and ink them on vellum for myself, just to you know. And it was a nice way to kind of learn things, like getting understanding like what they were trying to do, or the forms. And sometimes I would ink something and it was completely opposite of what they were trying to do, but I would show the inking work to other artists, and they'd say like, this is good, this is good. What the hell happened here? And
Mm.
but that was also like, you can't just. It's not tracing, although it is sort of. It's an art form in itself. Joe Kubert used to say you're oil painting in black with a
Yeah.
brush or with a pen, and he was very adamant about that in the Kubert days. That you're not tracing anything, you're adding to it, and you're enhancing it, and you're adding the depth, and you're playing with the light. And I know, to the world, it's like, oh, anyone could trace it. I mean, even my kids, it's like, or my wife, anyone could trace it. I'm like, okay, here, go ahead. Here's the marker. And then, because I was because I'm a graphics person and a multimedia person, I was able to. There's a lot of tricks and gimmicks that I've used with like Adobe products or whatnot that I was able to incorporate into my artwork, for Faith Fallon, because it's Faith Fallon's like 99% digital. And at the time, it was you know, coloring was with iPad, but I mean, it was all pre-iPad, old versions of Photoshop or whatever sort of drawing program I could find. I think I was using whatever worked if I could find something. I think I even did, honestly, I think I did some backgrounds in PowerPoint and then threw them into Photoshop as images and then just like drew over them, whatever would happen. And I would reference as much as I could, since it takes place in different time periods. Like I wanted to make the 40s look like the 40s. I wanted farms in Kansas to look like something from the Great Depression. Old Hollywood look like old Hollywood, and keep it going like that. And to be able to do 300 odd pages, it probably was uh, from initial thumbnails to like the final finished stuff. It was probably almost a good 10 years of on and off work to get it done. And then once it was done, then I just did all the lettering. And again, it was this sort of whole mechanical process where I made sure like every border was pretty much the same thickness, every word balloon, the fonts were consistent. And that was mostly like the graphics training. So I mean, I did hand lettering and with the Ames lettering guide and everything back in the 80s, but there was no way I was going to do that for 300 pages. So
Yeah.
I did a crash course in Blambot, and I like the Faith Fallon uses DC Dave Gibbons as the lettering, because I always kind of liked his lettering style in Watchmen. Not that I was trying to like rip it off entirely, but I just like the look of his lettering.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
so I also figured let's just keep the one consistent lettering and just keep it straight through. Even some of the like effects are pretty much the Gibbons font, or maybe an occasional impact font, just in case. But I didn't go too crazy. There was just it had a look and a feel, and that's what I was going for. And it's people seem to like it. I mean, I do get repeat people on the Kickstarters, which is a good thing. And
Mhm, mhm.
the latest Kickstarter will be issues 10, 11, and 12, which will be the end of the series. And, I also have, there's a catch up option if anyone wants to get the first 9 issues. Or honestly, if somebody wants to, you know, did some issues and missed a couple, they could always just contact me through Kickstarter and say, hey, I'll buy 10, 11, and 12. I only need 5 and 6. What do I do? and I'll work that out. I'll probably tell them, just do the contribution without an award type of thing for X amount of dollars, and then just email me and say, oh, I need these 2 issues. So this way everything's, free and clear. Like, I don't, that's sort of bending the rules. It's not breaking anything. And this way it helps, because I'm sure there's going to be first time people looking at this saying, damn, I missed the other 9 issues. Or
Right.
somebody will say, oh, you know, I thought he stopped at issue 6 for some reason. I didn't realize he did the last 7, 8, 9 Kickstarter. Can I get those? And I also offer some variant covers. There was one. This was actually there was a color version and a black and white version for the color. Let's get that here. This was done by Mark Pennington.
Nice.
Hopefully you can see it, but again, it's still through the color. Jesus, the color book. But he did a color version, and then when I got the file, I was like, the black and white looks really cool. Do you mind if I offer that too? He's like, yeah, go ahead. So that was like really nice of him. And then I'll do a couple of for myself. Like this was my original cover for issue 8,
Nice.
and I actually got the idea. I saw somebody else do a Dave Stevens homage, and I'm not saying I'm even close to Dave Stevens, so it's not, laugh at the inking or whatever. But I thought that this would have been a cool homage from that Her Boy Valkyrie cover that he did way back when. And it's kind of in that style, and I tried to like replicate it as best as I could. And the result, so this one was issue 7, the original issue 7, which was done in black and white. It was sort of like this old EC Comics type of look, featuring
Nice.
the characters. But a lot of this takes place where she's saved from her fate worse than death, and she ends up among these creatures living in the sewers of New York. And there's an old Spider-Man cover by John Romita, like issue 150 or 151, whatever. And I had to homage that one,
Oh yeah.
which is me basically doing that Kirby Romita type of look. And the original cover is Spider-Man going through the sewer. And yeah, I lifted the dialogue. Flooding the sewer won't help you, mister. Only one of us will get out alive, because it sort of works with the story. And
Nice.
the fabulous Faith Fallon. And, quickly, like, there's some of the, I hope people actually see this, but if not, go to the Kickstarter. And this is like some of the sewer creature people that's in there.
Cool.
So it has a little of everything. I mean, actually, the first 4 issues, I would say, are almost like a soap opera in a sense. The next 4 issues get into more of like a horror type of motif to it. And then the last 4, it strangles from horror to more modern day. And like the basic story, if she was born in like the late 1920s, the story concluded in the early 2000s. That would be the best way to describe it, because there's a brief appearance by a president who fought evildoers in the 2000s. There's a Ronald Reagan cameo in the 1980s when she's resurrected. And it's sort of a parody of like Max Headroom, the way he's played, that old TV show. And even there's a sequence where everyone believes she killed herself, where she's waxing poetic about how her, everything went to hell for her, and she thought she was going to be saved when she met Mr. Kennedy in Texas, because there's a line in the book where she says, it was really nice to meet a politician with half a brain in Texas. I know, awful. Don't kill me. But, obviously that didn't work out for her so well. And there's also some pop culture references going forward. So some of it's hits you in the face. Some of it's like super subtle. I know people that have read it say, oh, I didn't notice that the first time. And, it definitely gets people's attention. I mean, I know it's hard to get people to read anything or look at anything, whether it's even independent or not independent. But I'll just tell people like who have read maybe the first two issues, I have no idea what's going on. Like, keep going. You
Hmm.
gotta, it'll make sense at some point. It's going to, oh, that's why that happened. And why is it nonlinear in storytelling? Well, it just makes more sense. Sort of like, I guess, why did George Lucas do the middle trilogy before the prequels? It it still works. You just read it out of sequence, but it still sort of works. And we won't speak of 7, 8, and 9, but
Yes,
you
there
know,
was that.
yeah, there was that. Um, so it was just that's basically where I'm trying to go with it, and to get people interested in it. And I promise it's a hell of a trip, and I hope people enjoy it.
Where can people follow along? Where are some spaces they can go?
The best thing to do, honestly, just go to look me up on Instagram, Steven_Pennella_artist, or Steven Pennella artist. And I'm always posting stuff there. And to me, I used to have a website. I used to have a faithfallon.com and another one called thoughtandvision.com. And they both went with the thud. And it just wasn't even worth maintaining it. And the fact that Instagram is perfect because it's a quick 2-second attention span type of you know time waster. And I'm starting to get more play. It took a while, but finally starting to get some decent play on it. And like, I used to get 3 or 4 looks or likes. Now I'm getting, at least now, most of them, the views are at least in the hundreds. A couple of them have been in the
Yes.
thousands. In fact, like the one I had one last year, which was completely not comic book related, but I had went to see a band at a local venue. The band is Life of Agony. It's a hard rock metal band from Brooklyn, big in the
Mhm.
'90s and whatnot. And I don't know why they're not bigger than they are. I mean, they are amazing. So it was a small place. It was like the third time I've seen them, and it was like practically on stage. I managed to get a couple of good pictures off my phone and some recordings. And I did a cartoon portrait of the lead singer, Keith Caputo, and that got 17,500 views. Like a
Nice.
lot of, I never got that before in my life. And I got a lot of new followers from it. And then I started, branching out into other type of stuff, like before I started getting back into some of these smaller projects like Punch a Nazi, or some, covers for some anthology books and whatnot, I started like just working on like, portraits of celebrities or of people, putting those up there. And, that sort of worked, because even like sometimes I get people that'll say, oh, can you do an ink portrait of our family? And I'm like, yeah, just give me the photograph and I'll work on it here. Do it as like black and white type of thing. Um, that's, and that sort of is how I got hooked up with the Artist Guild. I was able to show them the comic book work, which I knew they weren't going to get, but I told them, look, a lot of I get that you guys are fine arts or modern art, and you're not going to understand comic books. And I understand I'm a comic book guy, and maybe I could do legitimately say I don't understand half this modern art stuff. But we're all artists, we're all creatives, and we should all try to learn from each other. We should respect each other's crafts and whatever. We
Mhm.
shouldn't just like dismiss it, like, oh, you just threw a bunch of paint on it, or ooh, you just drew a powerful, muscular dude. And it's I think I sort of talked my way into the guild, so that was nice. Let's see how that goes. If you hear that screeching, it's my dog in the background who seems to want to
Oh,
get out. It's just because I'm in a basement and it's a poodle. Don't get any. And it's very silent here. Don't get any ideas.
gotcha. Well,
Yeah.
I won't keep you from your fur
No, no,
family.
no. It's fine.
Um,
Don't worry about them. Gail, quiet. And I actually have one who's very quiet. Oh, this is Oslo.
Aw, sweet, sweet.
Yeah,
Very nice.
he's you're much better. You're much more well behaved. So anyway, is there like a lightning round or anything else you want to know art wise or creative wise or, ask away. I'm not sure
I,
where to.
I think that has everything that I need right now. The only other piece is if there are particular like I'll go to the Kickstarter page and pull in like pieces of art to put in as we're chatting. But if there are particular things that you'd like me to add, just let me know. You can shoot those to me on Instagram or wherever you'd
Yeah,
like.
I mean, honestly, if you see something on Instagram that you like, I can probably dig up a higher resolution piece and just, I can retransfer them for you. Or if you want to do
Right.
some covers or whatever, that would probably be the good thing. I know you could go to the Kickstarter page and probably pull some stuff, and you might be able to find. I don't know how much they show on old Kickstarters, but like everything's still up from the first one. But I could always
Cool.
I could always provide like if you want, I'll provide some images of the covers. I'll give me a day or two. I'll put them all up. I'll export everything out and I'll put it in as like a bunch of PNGs or something, so you can just download them and choose whichever ones you want to show. And at least everything's sort of consistent that way. And I'll
Right.
maybe a couple of interior pages. I mean, the book is a mature audiences book. I mean, it's not outright Kickstarter porn, and
Mhm.
hopefully it's not all TNA stuff, but it's no worse than any episode of say True Blood from HBO, something like that. I mean,
Gotcha.
it's not there just if there's a sex scene, it's not there just for the sake of doing it. If there's blood, it's not there just for the sake of doing it. It does sort of make sense, and nothing is like you know nothing's penthouse explicit. It's just it's I don't do that, and I know that Kickstarter is cracking down on stuff like that, but
Mhm.
I mean, there's mature audience, which is basically saying, PG-13 or whatever. And then there's just like, the adventures of boobed woman, you know,
Right. Right.
the bush in the jungle type of stuff. Like, that's not where I'm going. But I'll I anything I show, you'll be able to like put on screen and not have to worry about like the thought police coming after you or
Cool.
me
Cool.
for that matter. And I'll see if it's okay if I can share some of the Nazi stuff. I'll check with them. Maybe I can share like one of the pages from the first story. I'm still working on the
Yeah.
second. I can't really show that, but I'll, I'll ask. I'll ask them. Hey, do you mind? I'm part of the podcast, and he wants some artwork. And I mentioned that I'm doing Punch a Nazi, so I don't see why he'll say no. I think they'll be
Agreed.
I think they'll be more than happy to. So let me take care of that for you, and you'll get that in a couple of days.
Sounds great. Sounds great. I'll have this out in the next few weeks in time for the Kickstarter while it's on,
Yeah,
and I'll send it back your way and tag you and all of those things.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And if there's anything you think we should reshoot, if I ramble too much, I'm not sure. I know this is sort of like strain of consciousness and whatnot, but you
All
know,
good. All good.
I've seen a couple of the podcasts that you've done, and it's like I think I've been less ADHD than some people, and maybe more than others, but whatever. It's all good, I hope.
It works. It works. Yeah, good
All right.
conversation, and
Yeah,
I appreciate it. Glad to share about your work, and we'll plan another one when the next project is coming.
sounds good. Definitely.